The large chamber buzzed with activity as new cadets from across the galaxy filed in. It was orientation day at the Galactic Defense Academy, and nervous energy filled the air. Beings of all shapes, sizes, and colors moved about, their varied appendages clutching information tablets. At the front of the room stood Dean Krelvax, a tall, eight-limbed creature whose violet skin shimmered under the artificial lights. He raised 4 of his arms, and the room gradually fell silent. "Welcome to the 307th class of the Galactic Defense Academy," he said, his voice translator giving his words a slight metallic quality. "You represent the finest young minds from 57 worlds. Your training year will prepare you to serve in the Galactic Peace Force, the Scientific Corps, or Diplomatic Services." In the back row, 3 cadets sat together. Clarvosh, a reptilian being with iridescent scales and yellow eyes, looked bored. His species, the Vraxians, were known for their natural armor and impressive strength. Next to him sat Tresna, her 6 eyes constantly scanning the room. The Palaxi were famous for their analytical minds and photographic memory. On her other side was Blurix, a soft-bodied creature whose skin changed colors with his emotions, currently a light purple of excitement. "This semester, we have a special announcement," Dean Krelvax continued. "As many of you know, the Council recently made official contact with a previously isolated world called Earth. The species there, humans, have developed space travel independently without precursor guidance. While they are confined to their solar system, their technological progress has been remarkable for an organic species with such short lifespans." Clarvosh leaned toward his companions. "I heard they're basically walking meat sacks. No claws, no armor, not even decent night vision." Tresna's eyes blinked in sequence, yet they developed fusion technology only 3 centuries after discovering basic electricity. That suggests significant cognitive capabilities. They're also supposed to be extremely social and emotionally complex, Blurix added, his skin shifting to a thoughtful blue. The dean was now explaining the course selection process. "Among our elective offerings this semester is a new class, Lesser-Known Species Cultural Studies. Focusing on humans, it will be co-taught by Professor Zerix and an actual human representative." This caused a ripple of murmurs through the chamber. Most cadets had never seen a human in person. Later that day, the 3 friends reviewed the course catalog in the common area. "I'm signing up for the human class," Tresna announced. "Think how impressive it will look on my record to have studied them firsthand." Clarvosh snorted. "An easy grade, you mean? What's there to learn about a species that can't even regenerate lost limbs?" "I'm curious about them," Blurix said, shifting to an interested green. "The database says they're incredibly diverse for a single-planet species. They have thousands of languages and cultural groups." "Fine," Clarvosh sighed. "I'll join too. Maybe watching vids of soft, slow humans will be amusing." When they arrived at their first class the following week, they found 20 other curious cadets already seated. Professor Zerix, an ancient synthar with gray tendrils and a reputation for demanding excellence, stood at the teaching platform. "Today begins your education about humanity," he said solemnly. "I must warn you that some of what you learn may challenge your preconceptions about sentient development." The door at the side of the classroom slid open, and a figure walked in. The cadets stared at the human male. He stood about 180 centimeters tall, with light brown skin and short black hair on top of his head. He wore a blue uniform with various small emblems. "This is Lieutenant Greg Walton of Earth," Professor Zerix announced. "He is a military historian and will be your instructor for this course." The human smiled, showing flat white teeth. "Hello, everyone. I'm honored to be the first human to teach at this academy." Clarvosh whispered, "He looks so fragile. How did they ever survive to develop spaceflight?" Lieutenant Walton's eyes, only 2 of them, both dark brown, seemed to twinkle. "Today, we're going to start with a brief overview of human history. But in the coming weeks, I'll show you how my species faced challenges that forged our unique place in the galaxy. I think you might be surprised by what you learn. Blurix's skin rippled with anticipation. None of the cadets realized that this course would change their understanding not just of humans, but of themselves as well. Lieutenant Greg Walton stood before the class of alien cadets, his posture straight and confident. Unlike the various species watching him with their multiple eyes, tentacles, or sensory organs, Greg looked remarkably plain. No extra limbs, no natural armor, no visible adaptations for survival. Before we begin today's lesson, are there any questions about last week's overview of human history? Greg asked. Clarvoche raised a scaled hand. You mentioned that humans fought each other for most of your history. Why would you do that when there were external threats like predators? Greg nodded. Good question. Humans evolved as social group animals. We formed tribes for protection, but these tribes often competed for resources. As our technology improved, so did our conflicts. Tresna's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, but that seems inefficient for species survival. Perhaps, Greg said with a small smile. But competition also drove innovation. Our need to overcome challenges pushed us to develop new technologies and social structures. Blurix, his skin now a curious teal color, spoke next. The database says humans have no natural defenses. How did you survive long enough to become the dominant species? Greg walked to the front of his desk and leaned against it. We developed tools very early in our evolution. Our greatest natural assets are our brains and our hands. We can't run as fast as many predators, but we can build vehicles that move at incredible speeds. We can't fly, but we built machines that can. We adapted through invention rather than evolution. Professor Xerix moved forward, his gray tendrils swaying. Today, Lieutenant Walton will discuss human adaptability, particularly in challenging situations. This is important for understanding their approach to galactic relations. Greg tapped his tablet, and the room darkened. A 3-dimensional projection appeared, showing a barren, ice-covered landscape. This is Antarctica, one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Temperatures can drop to -80 degrees, with winds reaching 200 kilometers per hour. The image shifted to show humans in thick clothing, building structures, and conducting research. Yet humans not only visit there, we maintain permanent research stations. People volunteer to live there for months at a time. The cadets murmured with surprise. Clarvoche looked unimpressed. My species evolved in a methane atmosphere with temperatures far lower than that, he said dismissively. Yes, Greg replied, but your species is naturally adapted for those conditions. Humans aren't adapted for Antarctica at all. Our bodies would die in minutes without protection. Yet we go there by choice. The images changed again, showing deserts, deep oceans, dense jungles, and high mountains. Humans live in virtually every ecosystem on our planet, from the hottest deserts to floating cities on our oceans. When we can't naturally survive, we build what we need to make it possible. Tresna raised one of her thin arms. This adaptability is impressive, but what does it have to do with military history? Greg's expression grew more serious. Excellent transition. The same adaptability that lets us live in extreme environments drives our approach to conflict. Throughout our history, humans have had to overcome stronger, faster predators and harsh conditions. We learned to use our intelligence to compensate for physical limitations. He tapped his tablet again. Next week, we will begin examining human military history. I must warn you that some of the footage may be disturbing. Not because we want it to be, but because understanding how humans fight requires seeing the reality of it. Blurix's skin rippled with concern, turning a pale yellow. Is human conflict really that different from other species? Professor Xerix answered. The Galactic Council has classified certain aspects of human military history as restricted information until now. Lieutenant Walton has special permission to share these materials for educational purposes. Greg nodded solemnly. Most spacefaring species evolved beyond large-scale conflict, before developing advanced technology. Humans took a different path. Clarvoche leaned forward with new interest. "Now you have my attention, human." As the cadets filed out after class, Tresna looked troubled. "Do you think the rumors about humans are true? That they continued fighting wars even after developing nuclear weapons?" "Impossible," Clarvoche said. "No species could be that reckless and survive." Blurix's skin had turned a deep blue of contemplation. "I guess we'll find out next week, but something tells me we should prepare ourselves for what we might see." The classroom was unusually quiet as the cadets took their seats. Lieutenant Greg Walton stood at the front, his face more serious than in previous sessions. Professor Xerix hovered nearby, his gray tendrils perfectly still, a sign of solemn attention among his species. "Today," Greg began, "we start our examination of human military history. As I mentioned last week, some of this material may be disturbing. You're free to leave at any point if you need to." Clarvoche snorted softly. His scaled skin glistened under the room's lights. "We're training to be galactic defenders. We can handle whatever primitive conflicts your species engaged in." Greg nodded but didn't smile. "We'll start with ancient warfare and move forward in time." He tapped his tablet, and the room darkened. The first images showed humans in bronze armor, fighting with spears and swords. The cadets watched with mild interest as Greg explained different ancient armies and their tactics. The Roman legions were highly organized, Greg said as the projection showed formations of soldiers with rectangular shields. They conquered much of Earth's European continent through superior tactics and discipline. Tresna took careful notes, her 6 eyes blinking in different patterns. "Their weapons seem inefficient," she observed. "Why not just use ranged attacks exclusively?" "Resources and technology limitations," Greg answered. But humans adapted quickly. The images shifted to show mounted warriors firing bows from horseback. The Mongol Empire created the largest connected land empire in Earth's history through superior mobility and ranged combat. Blurix's skin had remained a calm blue throughout these early demonstrations. These conflicts seemed similar to territorial disputes on other worlds. Nothing too unusual so far. Greg's expression grew more somber. "Now we move to what humans call modern warfare. This began with industrialization, when we started mass-producing weapons and moving large armies by machine." The room darkened further. The new images showed massive fields of mud. Long ditches stretched across the landscape. Men in simple uniforms huddled in these trenches while explosions erupted around them. "This was the First World War," Greg explained quietly. "The first conflict where industrial machinery was fully applied to killing. Over 9 million soldiers died, nearly as many civilians. The footage showed men climbing out of trenches, running forward while many fell. Then came scenes of soldiers wearing strange masks, gasping for breath, their eyes wide with fear. Chemical warfare," Greg said. "Poison gas that burned lungs and blinded soldiers." A small cadet at the back suddenly stood and rushed from the room. Then another followed. Blurix's skin had turned a sickly gray. "They did this to other humans." "Yes," Greg said simply, "to other humans." The images continued, showing the wounded, the dead, the destroyed villages and towns. Clarvoche was no longer looking bored. His yellow eyes were wide, his usual smugness gone. "How long did this conflict last?" 4 years, Greg answered. "And after seeing this devastation," Tresna asked, her voice quieter than usual, "did humans stop such large-scale conflicts?" Greg was silent for a moment. "No. 21 years later, an even larger war began." At this, 3 more cadets stood and left the room. Blurix looked like he might join them, his skin now a pale, nauseated green. "I think that's enough for today," Professor Xerix interjected, his tendrils now moving in agitated patterns. "We'll continue next session." As the lights came back on, the remaining cadets sat in stunned silence. They gathered their things slowly, no one speaking. In the hallway outside, Tresna finally broke the silence. Did you see the looks on those humans' faces? They were terrified, but they kept going. It doesn't make sense, Klarvosh said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Why would they create weapons that destroyed their own environments? That killed so many of their own kind. Blurix's skin had settled into a troubled purple. I'm not sure I want to see what comes next week, if that was just the beginning. The three friends walked silently toward their next class, each lost in their own thoughts about the species they had previously considered physically unimpressive and technologically interesting, but otherwise unremarkable. None of them noticed Lieutenant Walton watching them from the classroom doorway, his expression a complex mixture of sadness and pride. Half the seats were empty when Lieutenant Greg Walton entered the classroom the following week. Professor Zarek stood near the door, counting the remaining cadets with a troubled expression. I see we have fewer students today, Greg said, placing his tablet on the desk. I understand. Last week's material was difficult to watch. Klarvosh, who sat stiffly in his usual spot, spoke up. The others were weak. If we are to understand your species, we cannot flinch from the truth. Blurix, whose skin had maintained a nervous lavender color since arriving, disagreed. It's not weakness to be disturbed by suffering. Many who left were from peaceful worlds with no history of organized violence. Greg nodded. Both perspectives have merit. Today's session will be even more challenging. We'll be covering what humans call World War I, the largest conflict in our recorded history. Tresna raised one of her slender limbs. Professor Zarek mentioned that 8 cadets have filed official complaints about this course. They say it violates the Academy's principle of promoting peaceful cooperation. The complaints have been noted, Professor Zarek said, his tendrils moving in formal patterns. However, the Galactic Council has approved this curriculum. Understanding human history, even its darkest aspects, is essential for meaningful diplomatic relations. Greg dimmed the lights and activated the holographic projector. World War II began just 2 decades after the First World War ended. It eventually involved nations from every continent on Earth. The first images showed massive factories filled with workers building tanks, planes, and ships. This was total war, Greg explained. Every aspect of society was focused on the conflict. Civilians worked in factories. Resources were rationed. Everyone participated. The footage shifted to show massive fleets of aircraft dropping bombs on cities below. Buildings collapsed. Fires spread across urban landscapes. Strategic bombing, Greg said quietly, targeting the enemy's industrial capacity, but often with devastating civilian casualties. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One near the front put her sensory appendages down flat against her head, a sign of distress in her species. Next came beach landings. Human soldiers rushed from boats onto sand while explosions erupted around them. Many fell and didn't get back up. D-Day, Greg said. The Allied invasion of Normandy. Thousands died in the first hours. The images continued. Tank battles across vast plains, soldiers fighting through destroyed cities, ships sinking in distant oceans. Klarvosh, who had been watching intently, suddenly spoke. What is the effective range of those projectile weapons? How did they penetrate armored vehicles? Greg answered his technical questions calmly, noting that the previously dismissive cadet was now showing intense interest in human military capabilities. When the lights came back on, only 12 cadets remained. 4 more had silently left during the presentation. Tresna's eyes were all fixed on Greg. Lieutenant Walton, my species has records of contact with many civilizations. None have exhibited this level of organized conflict. How did humans survive this? How did your planet remain habitable? Greg's expression was solemn. We came close to destroying ourselves. Over 70 million people died in World War II, but we also learned from it. International organizations were formed. New diplomatic protocols were established. Blurix, whose skin had shifted to a deep blue of sadness, asked, and did these measures work? Did humans stop fighting after this terrible war? Greg hesitated. Not entirely, no. Next week, we'll discuss the Cold War era and the development of nuclear weapons. After class, Professor Zarek stopped Greg in the hallway. I've received more withdrawal requests. At this rate, we may have only a handful of students by semester's end. Greg watched the remaining cadets walking away, their body language showing their distress. The ones who stay will understand humanity better than any non-humans ever have. That's worth something. In the academy dining hall, Klarvosh sat with Tresna and Blurix, talking rapidly. Did you see their tactics? How they adapted to different environments? These humans fight in deserts, in snow, in jungles, underwater, in the air, everywhere. But at what cost? Blurix asked, his skin rippling with troubled colors. The suffering we witnessed. I'm not sure I want to continue, Tresna admitted. But I'm also not sure I can stop now. I need to understand how this species that nearly destroyed itself is now reaching out to the stars. Only 9 cadets remained when the 5th session began. Lieutenant Greg Walton surveyed the small group with a look of quiet respect. These were the ones who had chosen to continue despite their discomfort. Today we move into what humans call modern warfare, Greg said. The period after World War II brought new technologies and new types of conflicts. The lights dimmed, and the holographic display activated. Images appeared showing soldiers in jungle environments, using helicopters and advanced weaponry. As weapons became more deadly, wars often became more limited in scope, but not necessarily in intensity. Greg explained. Smaller forces fought in specific regions rather than across entire continents. The footage showed soldiers moving through thick vegetation, faces painted for camouflage. It showed night vision operations, small teams moving silently through darkness. Humans adapted to fight in any environment, Greg continued. Deserts, jungles, mountains, Arctic conditions. We developed techniques and equipment for all terrains. Klarvosh leaned forward, yellow eyes fixed on the images. Your species lacks natural camouflage or heat regulation, yet you operate in these extreme environments. How? Training, Greg answered simply, and what we call embracing the suck, accepting discomfort as part of the mission. The footage shifted to urban combat, soldiers moving through destroyed buildings, communicating with hand signals, working in perfect coordination. City fighting requires different skills, Greg said. Limited visibility, civilians present, complex 3-dimensional movement. Each environment demanded new adaptations. Tresna's 6 eyes blinked rapidly as she took notes. The cognitive load for these soldiers must be immense. They're constantly processing threats, protecting teammates, identifying targets, and maintaining awareness of their surroundings. Greg nodded. Human soldiers train until these responses become almost instinctual. What looks like quick decision-making is often the result of thousands of hours of preparation. The next sequence showed special operations teams, small groups of highly trained soldiers performing complex missions with precision and coordination. Blurix, whose skin had been cycling through concerned colors, suddenly turned a surprised shade of pink. They appear almost like a single organism. Each human knows exactly what the others will do. Unit cohesion, Greg explained. Humans are social creatures. We form powerful bonds with our team members. In combat situations, that connection becomes even stronger. Professor Zarek, who had been quietly observing from the back, moved forward. This is perhaps the most important aspect for you to understand about humans. Their apparent physical limitations are overcome through cooperation and technological adaptation. After an hour of footage showing various modern combat scenarios, Greg turned the lights back on. Questions. Tresna raised a limb. These soldiers appeared different from those we saw in earlier wars. More professional, less frightened. Greg nodded. Modern human military forces are typically volunteers who choose military service as a career. They're better trained, better equipped, and better supported than soldiers of previous eras. A small green cadet in the front row spoke for the first time. Do you miss it? Being a soldier, the room went quiet. All eyes turned to Greg. He considered the question carefully. I miss the people I served with, the sense of purpose, the clarity. But no, I don't miss combat itself. After class, Blurix approached Greg privately. His skin had turned a respectful gold color. Lieutenant, my species is empathic. We feel the emotions of those around us. When we watch these videos, we sense echoes, pain, fear, but also determination. Something I don't understand. Greg smiled gently. That's called courage, Blurix. Doing what needs to be done despite your fear. In the hallway, Clarvash was talking excitedly with two other cadets. Their adaptability is remarkable. No natural advantages, yet they can fight effectively in any environment. Tresna joined them, her datapad filled with notes. Next week is the final war footage session, something called Humanitarian Operations. I'm not sure what that means. It means, said Professor Xerix, gliding up behind them, that you're about to see the other side of human military capability. And it may surprise you even more than what you've witnessed so far. The cadets looked at each other with uncertainty. Just when they thought they were beginning to understand humans, it seemed there was more to learn. The 9 remaining cadets entered the classroom with mixed feelings. After weeks of disturbing war footage, many wondered what new horrors they might see today. Lieutenant Greg Walton greeted them with an unexpected smile. Today's session will be different, he announced. We've examined human conflict in detail. Now I want to show you something else. How the same military forces you've seen in combat respond to other challenges. The lights dimmed, and new images filled the room. The cadets saw military ships and aircraft rushing toward areas devastated by massive waves. This was a tsunami, a natural disaster that struck coastal regions. Greg explained. Military vessels were the first responders, bringing supplies and medical aid. The footage showed uniformed humans setting up field hospitals, distributing water, carrying injured civilians to safety. Blurix's skin shifted to a confused yellow. These are the same warriors from previous videos. Yes, Greg confirmed. The same training that makes humans effective in combat also makes them effective in crisis response. Discipline, logistics, teamwork, these skills apply to many situations. The images changed to show soldiers building temporary bridges across flooded rivers, helicopters rescuing people from rooftops, and military engineers restoring power to damaged communities. Tresna tilted her head, all 6 eyes focused intently. They're using military equipment for helping. Exactly, Greg said. Human military forces serve multiple purposes. Defense is primary, but humanitarian assistance is also a core mission. The next sequence showed soldiers in desert environments digging wells and setting up water purification systems for local communities. Another showed military doctors treating civilians in remote villages. Clarvosh watched with newfound respect. On my world, warriors and healers are separate castes. Your species combines these roles. We do, Greg said. Most human militaries train their personnel in multiple skills. A combat medic can fight alongside infantry, but also save lives. Professor Xerix moved to the front of the room. This duality is what makes humans unique among known species. They can be fierce warriors and compassionate helpers, often switching between these roles in moments. Greg nodded. To help you understand this better, I've invited 2 guests today. The door opened, and 2 humans entered. A tall woman with dark skin and short black hair, and a broad-shouldered man with a beard. This is Major Diane Lewis and Sergeant Pete Garza. They've both served in combat and humanitarian missions. Major Lewis stepped forward. I commanded a medical unit in 3 conflict zones, but I spent more time helping communities rebuild after disasters than I have in combat. Sergeant Garza nodded. I was infantry for 12 years, fought in 2 wars. But the mission I remember most was rescuing families after a major earthquake. We worked for days without sleep, pulling survivors from collapsed buildings. The cadets listened intently as the two veterans shared their experiences. They described the challenges of both combat and relief operations, the toll they took, and why they considered both types of missions important. When the session ended, the cadets lingered, asking questions. Blurix approached Major Lewis hesitantly. "When you treat someone you were fighting against, how do you feel?" he asked, his skin a curious purple. She smiled. "That's when I feel most human. In that moment, they're not an enemy, just someone who needs help." Later, as the three friends walked through the academy grounds, they discussed what they had learned. "I misjudged humans," Clar Vosh admitted. "I thought their warlike nature was primitive. But they channel that same intensity into saving lives." Tresna nodded. "It's logical when you consider it. The skills needed for both activities overlap significantly." Blurix's skin had settled into a peaceful blue. "What impressed me most was how they spoke about honor and duty. Those concepts exist in many cultures, but humans seem to apply them broadly." Professor Xerix glided up beside them. "I'm pleased you've remained in the course. Next week, Lieutenant Walton will announce your final assignment." "Final assignment?" Tresna asked. "Yes," the professor replied, his tendrils forming a pattern that indicated satisfaction. "Now that you've begun to understand the complexity of human nature, you'll have the opportunity to study a specific aspect in depth." The three friends exchanged glances. What had started as a course they expected to be easy had become the most challenging, and potentially the most important, class of their academic careers. Lieutenant Greg Walton stood before the 9 remaining cadets with a proud expression. They had persevered through material that had caused many of their classmates to withdraw from the course. "Today I'll explain your final assignment," Greg said. "Each of you will select a specific aspect of human conflict to study in depth. But more importantly, you'll analyze what that conflict reveals about human psychology and society." Professor Xerix moved forward, his tendrils forming an elegant pattern that signified academic purpose. "This assignment is not merely about military tactics or technology. It is about understanding the species we now welcome into the galactic community." Greg activated his tablet, and a list of suggested topics appeared on each cadet's screen. "You have 2 weeks to complete your research and prepare a presentation. You may work individually or in small groups." The cadets scrolled through the options with interest. The list included historical conflicts, technological developments, ethical frameworks of warfare, and post-conflict reconciliation efforts. Clar Vosh immediately selected guerrilla warfare and asymmetric conflicts. His scaled fingers moved rapidly across his device as he began organizing his approach. "I want to understand how physically weaker human forces successfully fought against superior opponents," he explained to his friends. "The tactical applications could be valuable for planetary defense scenarios." Tresna chose logistics and industrial mobilization. All 6 of her eyes focused intently on her screen as she began accessing the Academy's databases. "The human ability to transform their entire economies for war purposes is unprecedented," she said. "No other known species has demonstrated this level of societal coordination without a hive mind." Blurix hesitated longer before selecting post-conflict reconciliation and peace-building. His skin shifted to a thoughtful green as he considered his choice. "If we're to truly understand humans," he said quietly, "we must understand not just how they fight, but how they heal afterward, both themselves and their former enemies." In the days that followed, the cadets immersed themselves in their research. They spent hours in the Academy's Information Center, reviewing historical records, analyzing footage, and discussing their findings. Professor Xerix observed their progress with growing satisfaction. He found Tresna late one night, surrounded by virtual displays showing manufacturing statistics from human conflicts. "You seem fascinated by human production capabilities," he noted. Tresna didn't look up from her work. During what they called World War II, humans increased their aircraft production from hundreds per year to thousands per month, without automation or advanced materials. It's mathematically impressive. In another corner of the information center, Vosh studied recordings of human special forces operations with intense concentration. He paused and replayed sections, taking detailed notes on movement patterns and communication techniques. Finding something useful? Greg asked, approaching quietly. Vosh nodded. Their physical limitations forced them to develop superior tactics. There are lessons here that even my species could apply. Blurix spent his time differently. He reviewed accounts of peace treaties, reconciliation committees, and former enemies becoming allies. His skin often shifted to emotional purples and blues as he absorbed the complex feelings behind these processes. One afternoon, the three friends gathered to share their progress. Each was surprised by how deeply they had delved into their chosen topics. I never expected to admire human military logistics, Tresna admitted, but their ability to solve complex supply problems under pressure is remarkable. Vosh nodded. And their adaptive combat tactics show an intelligence I initially failed to recognize. They compensate for physical weakness through innovation. Blurix's skin rippled with an excited teal color. What's most impressive is their capacity for reconciliation. Species that fought devastating wars later became close allies. That requires significant emotional evolution. As they talked, they realized something important had changed. They had begun the course viewing humans as an interesting but primitive curiosity. Now they spoke of human capabilities with genuine respect. Professor Xerix glided past, overhearing their conversation. He exchanged a knowing look with Lieutenant Walton, who was supervising nearby students. The experiment was working exactly as planned. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Defense Academy was filled with dignitaries from across the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat in the tiered seating, their varied anatomies creating a colorful mosaic of life forms. At the front of the hall, Academy officials prepared for the graduation ceremony. Among the honored guests was a delegation of humans. They sat together, looking somewhat plain compared to the exotic beings around them. But they carried themselves with quiet confidence. The 9 cadets who had completed Lieutenant Walton's course stood nervously backstage. They wore formal academy uniforms, each customized for their species' anatomy. I didn't expect such a large audience, Blurix whispered, his skin cycling through anxious color patterns. The Galactic Council sent representatives. Tresna noted, her 6 eyes scanning the crowd. This seems more significant than a regular graduation. Professor Xerix approached them, his tendrils forming a pattern of formal greeting. You have all done exceptional work. Today you will present your findings not just to the Academy, but to diplomatic representatives from across the galaxy. Vosh straightened his posture. Why is our small class receiving such attention? Lieutenant Greg Walton joined them, wearing a formal human military uniform covered with colorful ribbons and medals. Because your work has implications beyond academics. The Galactic Council needed to assess whether humans would be peaceful members of the galactic community or a potential threat. The cadets looked at each other in surprise. Their course had been part of a larger diplomatic effort. The ceremony began with traditional academy rituals. Then Dean Krulvax announced, "We will now hear presentations from cadets who have completed special studies in human military history and culture." One by one, the cadets shared their findings. They spoke not just of human warfare, but of what it revealed about human nature. Vosh explained how humans compensated for physical limitations through innovation and adaptability. Tresna demonstrated how human societies could mobilize with remarkable unity despite their individualistic nature. Blurix described how humans could rebuild relationships after devastating conflicts. When all 9 had finished, a tall, elegant alien rose from the Galactic Council section. She was Ambassador Nilari, a respected diplomat known throughout the galaxy. "Young cadets," she began, her voice translator giving her words a musical quality. "Your insights are invaluable. When humans first approached the Galactic Council, many feared their warlike history made them unsuitable for membership in our peaceful community." She gestured toward the human delegation. "We needed to understand whether humans had evolved beyond their violent past, or simply redirected it. Your analyses suggest that human military capabilities are matched by their capacity for compassion, innovation, and reconciliation. The ambassador turned to face the humans directly. Based on the findings presented today, the Council votes to approve full diplomatic relations with Earth and to begin technology exchange programs. The hall erupted in the various sounds of approval from different species. The human delegates stood and bowed respectfully. After the ceremony, the cadets gathered with Lieutenant Walton and Professor Xerix at a celebration reception. "You used us," Clarvash said to Professor Xerix, but his tone was more impressed than accusatory. The professor's tendrils formed a pattern of gentle acknowledgement. "We needed honest, unbiased analysis from the galaxy's brightest young minds. You provided exactly that." Greg raised a glass in toast. "And in doing so, you've helped forge an alliance that will benefit both humans and the galactic community." Tresna looked thoughtful. "So our real test wasn't academic. It was whether we could see beyond humanity's violent history to their potential." "Precisely," said a voice behind them. Ambassador Nilari had joined their circle. "And now we have another proposition. We are establishing exchange programs with Earth. Would any of you be interested in continuing your studies there?" The three friends looked at each other, then back at the ambassador. "I would," said Blurix, his skin glowing with excited colors. "As would I," Tresna added. "How could I refuse?" Clarv Vosh said with a toothy grin. "There is clearly much more to learn about these humans." Greg smiled proudly at his students. What had begun with alien cadets watching disturbing war clips had ended with a deeper understanding between species, and perhaps, he thought, that understanding would help both humans and aliens build a more peaceful future together.